All right. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for another soul-driven interview. These interviews are with people from all walks of life who've discovered their true purpose and are living it out every day. Apparently, I can't speak today. Today, I'm excited to introduce Roger Lockshier to the podcast, who is a shaman, healer, and ritualist. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Hey, Anna. Thank you for having me today.
Did I pronounce your last name right?
You sure did.
Okay, good.
And thanks for asking, but you did. You nailed it.
I meant to ask you that before we started recording, but life.
Yeah.
Actually, I should hashtag this Monday, right? Since we've been talking about our Mondays.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited to speak with you today, and I have so many questions for you. But first, we're going to start off with my big question.
Okay.
What makes you soul-driven?
Okay, so that's a great question. I love that question. I think for me, it comes down to something that you just mentioned, and that's purpose. So just a little backstory. I worked for years as a nurse in healthcare, and I felt like I was doing good work. I felt like I was a good nurse and I was making a difference in people's lives. But I was also had my spiritual practice and kind of the healing work I was doing, which was outside the realm of the hospital. And I knew that when I went to work as a nurse, I put on my scrubs every day before my shift and everything, and put on the uniform. I was fulfilling a role, right? I was going to work as a nurse, and then I would come home, and for the other 12 hours of the day, I was just me. And it started to become really clear to me, really actually through my wife, Allison, really poking me and saying, when are you just going to say yes to this aspect of your life, like full time? Because that's who you really are. That's who you are. And so for a couple years, I kept getting the little poke, and I'd say, yeah, that's true. And I do believe that, but something was holding me back. And I only saw myself as, I shouldn't say only, but I saw myself as I had to fulfill what would be in the construct of society, this other role. This is what I did for a living. And this other piece was somehow a separate piece, right? And I came to an understanding through a lot of meditation, a lot of discussions with Allison, that really my purpose was to just be who I was 24/7, 365 days a year. And in August of a couple of years, 2018, so almost 2 years ago, coming home from a retreat that we facilitate every year, my wife asked me that question again: when are you just going to say yes and embrace this as just who you are full time, all the time? And I said, yes. At that point, I said yes. And the following day, I went into my clinic that I worked at, and I gave my 30-day notice to just commit myself to this life. So for me, it's about purpose. Being soul-driven is about aligning what our will is, what that fire is that really lights us up. And everyone has that. Everyone has a purpose. And I truly believe every human being comes into this world with a specific purpose. And that's what it means to be soul-driven. And and I don't think that everyone needs to run out tomorrow and give their 30-day notice to their boss. That's not necessarily the point to the story. Because there are people that I met working in healthcare doctors, nurses, physical therapists that were clearly doing what they were meant to do in this world. I've seen amazing nurses and doctors that were clearly aligned with a purpose. And I would say that they were soul driven because it was who they are as people. Like, you could see them just light up and truly make a major impact on their patients. And then you see some folks that really probably shouldn't be working in the healthcare profession. It wasn't what they're meant to do. Maybe they're meant to be, who knows, a chef, a gardener, a carpenter, and, but what they were doing was not what they should be doing. And it was very obvious. I think we can look at that across the board. And again, it's not just about what we do for a living. It's about how we show up in the world and how we're living our lives with purpose and making a difference. And for me, that was what I needed to do for my life, to be living truly with purpose. But that was just what I needed to do. And it was a huge leap of faith, and it was scary, but it was an important thing. And it was one of the most important things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, I bet. So first of all, I love that. And I think there was something about the way it sounds simple, my purpose is to be myself, but that's such a courageous thing for us to do in this life. We've got so much pressure coming at us the moment that we're born to be compared to another baby or a sibling or a person, and then as we get, as we continue growing, those comparisons just continue to like file in the room. And before long, we're kind of like, wait a minute, what am I? Who am I? And just with all of the societal conditioning that we live under, and, the pressure from our parents, and just pressure that kind of comes out of nowhere. It's that philosophy that the simplest things are the hardest things to do in life. And of course,
So true.
Being ourself is like probably got to be at the top of the list. Right next to like loving your neighbors.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's part of it's easier said than done. And where we are as a society right now, for the most part, and the way we've been living our lives, not just us, but generationally, I think for a lot of us, we don't know who we truly are, right? Underneath all those layers, who is that person underneath all that? We're not the jobs that we work necessarily, or the roles that we play in life. Yes, I'm a husband and father and all those things, and I'm proud to be, and I'm very happy to be. Wouldn't change that for anything in the world, but that's not who I am either. I fulfill those roles, and it's the same with like a spiritual practice. It's hard for me to define, even the word shamanism, because to me, I'm just living what I feel is aligned with something greater than myself, and so that word is what is describes most accurately what it is that I align with. But I feel so much that I'm just being who I am.
Right.
Does that make sense how I'm saying that? And
Absolutely.
so, and so much of what I do when I work with clients, one-on-one, is to help people. One of the things that I do is to help people find that purpose and embrace it, and to start to live in alignment with purpose. But it's a process, because it's not as easy as just flipping a switch and saying, okay, I'm going to live with purpose. Well, what does that mean? And it's a process, right? And sometimes and you mentioned something about prioritizing and things. It really is about making sure that we're prioritizing ourselves first, not in a selfish way, but in a way that says the idea that if I can be the greatest version of a human being I can be, then that's going to have a ripple effect with everybody I come in contact with. If we're looking to be a good version of ourselves, being a good human being, of course we're going to make mistakes. Of course we're going to have bad days. We were joking about today, what was going on today with us before we started recording. We're going to have those moments that challenge us. But if we're truly underneath it all, if our goal is to be a good human being to ourselves and then to other people, the contribution that we can make, how do we help others? That's where I think, for me, that's one of the things that really lights me up. I think that is what people on the collective, I think that's where we're going, is a realization that as human beings, what we're really here to do is to live to our fullest and help each other.
Yeah.
You know, and to elevate each other, you know, and I think that that's a real key piece to all of this and where we're going.
So I'd love to, you'll hear me say at the end of this show, like the quote that I live by, which is my own quote. It was kind of just channeled down to me, but when we invest in ourselves, the world benefits.
Yeah.
And I just, fully embrace that and live by that. What I'd love to, like what I'm curious to know though, is why it took you so long to say yes to your purpose.
That's a loaded question, right? And there's lots of answers to it. There's lots of answers to it. So, I guess for me is that it's always been a part of like the whole shamanic work and that experience and that expression of how I connect with source. You can say spirit, capital S, God, goddess, creator, the universe, however you personally tap into that higher consciousness. It's always been an important piece to my life, but I think it took me, 48 years to realize that didn't have to just be a part of my life. That could just be my life.
Yeah.
Right. Because talking about like the pressures of society and the way we're made to think, not to anyone's fault. It's not like, I was raised in a middle-class family in Connecticut, fairly normal circumstances. My folks are still together to this day. They brought me to church when I was a kid, kind of grew up in small town USA is what I'm getting at. But societal pressures dictate to us that we grow up to become something else. What are you going to be when you grow up? You're going to be a fireman, a doctor, a policeman, a this or that, a lawyer. And so, early on, I knew that I had different feelings about spirituality than the folks that I knew in my family and friends and things. And so as I got older, I pursued things that were of interest to me. For instance, I played music for a long time. I worked for a music company for 13 years in management and traveled around and did that. And because it was what I was doing for a living, right? I still had all this other side to me, but it was more of a perspective. It was a shift in perspective that I had to come to a place. It's like, well, I can make a contribution and I can still take care of my family and live the way I want to live by being who I am, so it took me time because I never equated who I was spiritually, and I still don't in many ways. I don't call it my job, right? Even though that is the way I generate that energy exchange called money. That's how I pay the bills, so to speak. But I never equated one with the other. And in some ways I still don't. I don't even get I don't get myself wrapped up in the whole money thing, in a sense that we live abundantly and the world is an abundant place. And if we take care of the important things, the rest takes care of all the little details. And it's true. And it's miraculous and it's magical. But it took me time to realize that, because I saw the two as being in two separate little boxes. Like
Right.
you lived a certain way to pay the bills, and that had to fit in a nice little package, and so I worked for a music company, and then I, did some other things. I ended up going to nursing school, worked in healthcare for over a decade, all while doing all this other stuff, not seeing that, well, if I just put all the energy into the same 8 to 10 hours a day, 12 hours at a clinic or in a hospital or whatever, if I just funneled that same energy into back into myself and shined that out into the world, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And I'm learning that. I'm learning that.
Well, I think I mean, I thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important. A lot of um, finding your purpose and all of that has become really trendy over
Yeah.
the past 2 years. And I think it's a good thing. I mean, in a lot of ways, because I mean, that's really where this podcast originated from. Is I felt like there are a lot of people asking very spiritual questions and really, wanting to create or touch in with that spiritual part of their life, but at the same time, like they gotta pay bills, right? So
Right.
navigating that and figuring out how to make that possible
Yep.
was an impetus to this. And so I appreciate that, because it does take time. And I think for every person, obviously it's different. For some folks, they have the resource or whatever it may be to make a fast change. For other, it's a mindset. For others, it's financial. For other, I mean, like, it's so different for all of us.
Yes.
And as my stepdad always said growing up, like, it's not a race,
Yeah.
Before we step into any more questions, I just kind of want to pull back a little bit. And if we can define like shamanism for folks, in case
Yeah.
there's people listening who aren't sure, I,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that they understand kind of the baseline before we dive in here.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great. And thanks for putting the pause on that before we get too far into this. So shamanism, um, is it's a spiritual tradition. Okay. So it's not a religion, but it's a spiritual tradition that can be found all across the world. On every continent, we find shamanic practice. And these are a way that people, typically indigenous people, before organized religion, before modern technologies and things, the way that people celebrated their spirituality, but their spirituality was also tied into healing and how they related to their tribe, clan, family, whatever, um, and to their community. And so shamanism is, sometimes people hear shamanism, and in this country, they'll immediately think of like the Native American healer, which is maybe an accurate thought to have in a sense, but it's not only something that existed in North and South America, but can be found on every continent. You go back far enough. And what that really looks like is that spirit, capital S, is part of everything. So spirit flows through the two of us, flows through all people, all animals, all insects, all trees and plants, through the earth, through everything. There is no this and that. In other words, spirit exists with us and is part of our lives. So it can be seen as a nature-centered or nature-centric spirituality, but it's certainly more complex than that. I'm taking just a few minutes to really kind of boil down, and it's not doing, it certainly can't do justice to these, hundreds and maybe thousands of traditions that have existed all over the planet. But really, in a nutshell, it's a nature-centered approach to spirituality where spirit is manifest in all life. And so everything is a sentient being, whether it's a human, an animal, or a plant, or a stone, or the earth herself. All living, all sentient beings with feelings, and we can interact with them, and we can we can interact just like we do with humans. We can interact and have those same types of relationships with the animal kingdom and with the earth and with everything in spirit's creation. So that's a real condensed what is shamanism. But I do want to tack on a little extra piece to that. And that is this. Not all nature-centered spiritual practice is actually shamanism. And what I mean by that is that shamanism, as far as a group's shaman, so each tradition would actually have a person or maybe multiple people who were the shamans. And the word itself, obviously people speak all different languages. The word shaman is actually a Siberian word. So the tribal people of Siberia, indigenous people, use that word shaman to describe their folks that were the natural healers and priests and priestesses. They fulfilled that same role. So we're using a word kind of as a universal, but obviously depending on where you are on the planet, you're going to have a specific, it's like priest or priestess or minister or healer or doctor. Those are all English words that we use. If you lived in another country, you'd be using your language, the native language, to say doctor or priest or minister. But the actual act of being a shaman really boils down to three things. So the shaman is the healer for their group. The shaman is the clergy member for their group. And the shaman is kind of like the therapist for their group, right? And so we as modern humans are amazing critical thinkers, and we tend to put things in a box, right? We tend to say, okay, well, medicine lives over in this box, and spirituality lives over in this box, and psychotherapy lives over in this box, and all these things are separate, and no one's really talking to each other. But in reality, all of those things, it's the mind, body, spirit thing. All of those things are connected. So the shaman fulfills all three of those roles, and the shaman does that within an altered state. So the shaman actually does three things. They change their consciousness. They do what's called a shamanic journey, which is similar to something like a very, very deep guided meditation, but it goes even further. And they have their experiences, contact with spirit guides, spirit capital S, and then they come back from their journey, and that's the medicine that is then shared with those that they're working with, or with themselves, or with the prophecy or the divination or whatever. It's through that altered state that they receive that information, and then it's shared with others. Did I make sense of that?
Yeah, you did. I mean, I think
And
that,
I'm condensing a lot of information in a short amount of time. But if anyone's interested in the practice of shamanism, I will tell you The Way of the Shaman. It's a book by someone named Michael Harner. It is the classic on shamanic practice. So anyone that's listening to this that wants to get a little bit more of an insight in depth, and Michael Harner traveled to South America in the 1950s as an anthropologist and lived with traditional healers, and came back and wrote. So many of the things that we know today about shamanic practice, we can really bring back to, as far as modern times, to what Michael Harner started writing about years and years ago. So The Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner is a really great kind of foundational book for anyone interested in kind of getting a little bit more in depth as to what that looks like.
awesome. Well, I'll make sure to leave a link in the show notes for anyone who's interested in checking out that book. Yeah, every time because I've heard quite a few shamans interviewed on different podcasts, and when that question's asked, I feel like it's such a broad and enormous question. I'm glad I'm not on the receiving end of it.
It's a hard one to answer.
Yeah.
It's a hard one to answer because,
well, it has so much context and so much history and so much depth. And I think that you did a great job. So how did you find shamanism, and
wow.
why did you choose it?
Yeah. And so how I found it was a really, really long process. Um, as I mentioned earlier, you know, when I was a kid growing up in Connecticut, kind of small town USA, my folks brought brought us to church every Sunday, and I had a really positive, by and large, experience going to church. We were Episcopal and took us to an Episcopalian church, and by and large had a very positive experience going to church. Meaning, met lots of friends, was involved in youth groups when I was a kid, and you know, so from that perspective, it was really good for me. However, something just what didn't feel right for me. Like I felt like there was something else. And growing up in the country, I felt most, I guess, spiritually connected is a good word, when I was outside. When I was outside playing underneath the trees or splashing around in a creek by our house, listening to birds singing outside. Like those were the things that, for whatever reason, they were tugging at my heart. And those felt like, for lack of a better word, I felt more connected to a higher source that in those moments as a young child and as I got older than I did in the building on Sunday morning.
For
Right. And
sure.
now some people, organized religion and things are very important, and they do have that plug-in point. So I'm not suggesting that just because I didn't feel that connection, that it's wrong for everybody. Some people are very, very connected in that way, and it works for them. But it didn't really work for me, and I didn't know why. I was also very empathic as a child. And so I didn't understand the psychic component of some of the things that were going on. So it caused me to be a little bit of a seeker. So when I was a teenager, it kind of started, and I started with what was accessible to me at the local library or the local bookstores. And the first things I stumbled upon were books on like crystals, or some things like Black Elk Speaks, which is a fantastic book, highly recommended. So some of the Native American traditions and stories, that's what was accessible to me. And so I started to go in that direction, certainly feeling much more comfortable and much more connected from in a spiritual way to some of those things. And then around 1990 or 91, a little metaphysical store opened up in my hometown. And so I went in, and the woman who owned the store was Wiccan. So I don't know if you're familiar with Wicca or any of that. And it kind of pulled me into that direction for a while. So I started to, you know, get involved in a lot of the Wiccan tradition stuff. And what really got me, got kind of the gears of my head started turning, because I was realizing that, you know, aside from a lot of the ceremonial tools and practices and things, the concept behind the stuff that I was learning and practicing with Wicca, meaning that divinity is within nature and all that. And I started to realize that, wow, you know, I'm a European of European ancestry for the most part, 90 something percent. It always felt like some of these indigenous practices, like the Native American traditions, they belong to someone else, right? So it was like I could relate to it to a certain degree, but I felt like it was still someone else's belief system, just like kind of like the church thing did. It felt a little bit more familiar and a little bit more aligned. But then when I had this realization that, wow, like my European ancestors, before religion became this organized thing, and we had our own traditions too, and they weren't that different from the traditions of North American people. And then I started looking at the practices of South America, and I started going all around and studying and learning all these different things. And I kind of started connecting the dots that what is left in the written record through stories, mythologies, and things are really pointing towards this idea of connection to spirit through nature, right? Through living with the elements. So it was a process, and my process wasn't a straight line. It was lots of zigzags, but it was a discovery process. And I absolutely loved the journey I took on it, because then I could start to embrace traditions that existed for Celtic people, or people from Scandinavia, or people from, early into history and into England and Germany. And so
I think that that's
what's
just a really crucial thing to kind of point out. Not only the fact that, you stepping into shamanism wasn't a straight path, but then also because it was all of these zigzags. When you came to shamanism, you were bringing all of these, like, just the beautiful different colors and tastes of several different traditions from which you could
yes,
pull with, that not only, that you could honor and enhance. And I mean, like, what a much richer experience, like at the end of the road. I feel like some people are so intent upon getting to the end of whatever path that they're going that they don't realize that really it's all the riches along the way that make kind of whatever the end of that particular path is so much more incredible.
that is so true. It's always the process, right? Because it's not over for me, and that's exciting.
Yes.
And it keeps it exciting, and it shouldn't have an end. There shouldn't be an end game. In other words, it is the point of the exercise is to be in it, and for things to evolve, and to be present with it and embrace it. And for me too, and I think this is also a real important part that I find at least important to at least mention, and I do this whenever I work with groups of people. There's been so much cultural appropriation of specifically Native American traditions, that it's really, really important for us with European heritage and descendant that we just don't go and take and borrow and steal from other people's traditions without understanding what they are. And so so although my practice tends to be somewhat eclectic in nature, I do lean heavy on the side of my Celtic roots and my European roots. And an example of that, I could tell you, is sometime around 1998 or 99, somewhere around there. I was living in the Midwest. I was living in a suburb of Chicago. And I had a really wonderful teacher, and his name was Larry. And Larry was of Navajo descent. And so Larry had invited me to a medicine wheel ceremony. He said, "I do these on Sunday evenings. Please come and join me, and my wife. Please come and join us. And it's an open thing, and there will be other people." I said, "Okay, that sounds great." So I started going to his medicine wheel teaching. He was very open to share this with anybody, and that's the thing that's, talking about cultural appropriation. There's so many people who are just willing to teach some of these traditions. Just ask, for those teachers, and so many of them will share. But to the point of this, Larry was a pipe carrier, and in his tradition, being a pipe carrier is extremely important, and it's done with honor and respect. And to be a pipe carrier is a big deal. So Larry had offered to a few of us, would we want to become pipe carriers? And he would teach us how to actually make and carve our pipe and do this whole thing. And of course, at this point I was maybe 28 or 29 years old, and I'm like jumping up and down. Absolutely, I want to do this. And so I went out and I got the things that he asked me to get. And so I got my pipe stone and I'm carving away. And about 6 months into the process, I had a realization that if I completed this, it was really, really important for me to follow this tradition and keep it intact, right? Because it's a really important thing, and it's an honorable thing to be a pipe carrier. And I had a realization that I couldn't just be a pipe carrier. I knew that there were other things for me to explore. Not that that didn't have any value. It's actually the opposite. I didn't want to be and I'm just going to say it, I didn't want to be the white guy with the Native American stuff and be that person perceived that's maybe culturally appropriating something, even though this was being taught to me and freely offered to me. But I made a decision that, thank goodness there are people that are willing to share this, because these traditions need to live. These are traditions that are thousands of years old that need to continue on. I'm not the one to carry that tradition forward, but luckily there are people. So I made a decision to put it down and respectfully say to my friend Larry, thank you for showing me and teaching me what you have to this point, but I cannot just follow that tradition. It's not right for me. So I'm going to step away from it. And it was an important, I think I did the right thing. I really do, because there are people who will pick up and answer that call and be able to live and carry that pipe and do what's necessary to live in that way. That wasn't going to be my path.
Well,
And
it
so it was
sounds like so great. Go ahead.
yeah. And I'm glad that I made that decision, because it's a really beautiful tradition. I had other traditions to go and connect to and
Yeah.
create, and so the other piece that I want to mention for folks who may be listening to this, who don't have, who feel that, well, I don't have a connection to Native American heritage and things like that. Doesn't matter where you come from on the planet, whether you come from North or South America or Australia or Africa or Asia or wherever. We have traditions that actually belong, that are part of our heritage, that we can bring forward and not feel like we're taking and borrowing from other people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense how I'm saying that?
Of
In other
course.
words, I think it's great to be eclectic to a certain, to welcome things from all traditions. But certainly there are some traditions that have just been stolen from and
Yeah.
taken from without the understanding of what it really means and the importance and how sacred it is to people. And so I don't want to devalue that in any way for anyone. And that's why I'm always careful when I talk about the word shaman, because to someone from Siberia, a shaman is someone from a healer from Siberia, and that's who they are. But we have to speak language. We have to use words that put things into context. And so,
Right.
yes, we can use it and say that there are people all over the planet that have almost identical practices, and that can't be just a coincidence. I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing, but that's also empowering. So we can go, you know what, we can have our own expressions of this that are equally valid and equally as sacred, without having to take from some folks that maybe have had enough already taken from them.
Right.
Even to this day, right? Even to this day, the First Nation people in Canada and folks in North America and South America are still fighting to this day to hold on to their traditions.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm really curious. I know that I have been on shamanic journeys and enjoy them immensely.
Yeah.
And, but I'd love to bring this kind of into the practical for folks who haven't and don't have much experience with shamanism or working with a shaman or doing a shamanic journey. Let's talk a little bit about how it is that you work with folks, right?
Yeah.
On the one-to-one, like how do you bring this beautiful like love of nature and all of these things into someone's life?
Yeah. Yeah. So clients that I see come to me for lots of different reasons. So some folks come and they want to have readings done. So obviously, I'm sure you're aware of this, but I do readings for people. I use runes and oracles and things like that. So sometimes it's a reading, just like someone who uses tarot cards, but I just use different tools to do that. For healing, oftentimes it's energy work that's very similar to Reiki. I'm sure a lot of people listening are familiar with Reiki, and some probably people listening that are Reiki practitioners or masters themselves. So shamanic energy work is very similar to Reiki in that we're pulling in and tapping into a universal life force that flows through us. It's not coming from us. We're just the channel for it. We're just we're directing that current. And then you mentioned like the shamanic journey, and that's another piece. There's many, many pieces and kind of tools in the tool bag. The shamanic journey, for someone wanting to seek a shamanic journey, it's not where we're going anywhere physically. We're actually going internally. So it's similar, like I mentioned earlier, to going into a very, very deep guided meditation, but it's even further than that. It's I would equate it close to a hypnotic state. And so that's attained by different ways, different methodologies. You can actually get to that state, that highly altered hypnotic state. In It's typically done with you starting with relaxation techniques, some breathing techniques, some grounding, then a guided by voice. I may guide someone into deeper into their state, and then I use sound when I work with clients, and drum. So the drum, and it's a repetitive thump, 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 like a heartbeat, and that repetitive thump, 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 very similar to, a young person that goes to a rave and they listen to electronic music and dance all night, and a thump, 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 thump. And it creates this hypnotic trance-like state. And you'll even hear young people go to raves and say, oh my gosh, it was like a religious experience. And well, it's because it was. You were having a spiritual experience. You were tranced out and you were one with that whole experience. So the idea is to get someone so relaxed and into that point where they can open up. They can open up and start to have experiences for themselves, connecting with their spirit guides, or how they connect in with their concept of a creator or higher source. So it's very intentional, and it's not just done just for the sake of just to do. It's done with intention to go in deeper, to ask for guidance, to ask for healing.
I was just going
To
to ask.
find what needs healing in the body, right? And so I use the drum because it's a very effective tool to use, and it's safe, meaning if I were doing a journey with you, when it's all said and done, you can have some water, have a bite to eat, get in your car and drive home. You're fine. You've come out, you may feel tired, you may feel a little bit, you may feel really supercharged, but you are back to your physical present self. You're thinking clearly, you can go on with your day. But there are other methods there are other ways to go into that shamanic journey, and some people will use ecstatic dance. Some people will use plant medicines. The difference with using plant medicine is once you're taking in that plant medicine and you're ingesting that into your body, now you're also communing with the spirit within that plant. And you may not be able to get in your car and drive home after that. That may not be the safe thing for you to do. And so plant medicines are one way to do the journey. The drumming is another way. Ecstatic dance is another way. People do things that go into deprivations, like going into a sweat lodge or into a kiva, where it's completely dark and it's extremely hot and it creates a vision. So it's all about having this visionary experience and healing experience. That's the end result. How you get there, the tools you use to get there are almost irrelevant, right? Because they're all equally as valid. So plant medicine will get you there. Ecstatic dance can get you there. Drumming can get you there. They're all equally valid. It's just the tools that you use.
So what are some of the reasons that someone would want to do like a shamanic journey?
So oftentimes one of the key pieces is to work on shadow work. Okay. And so that is probably one of the top requests in going into doing deep shamanic journey work, is to uncover aspects of another person's feeling like, boy, something happened to me years ago. It was traumatic. I never recovered from it. I feel like I behave in a certain way, and I feel like maybe it's connected to this, or maybe they don't even have an understanding that something happened to them. And it's a traumatic experience that maybe is causing them to live a certain way or have a certain dynamic within relationships or whatever. And some of that, in a traditional sense, you may have heard the idea of the soul retrieval, the idea that a piece of our soul breaks off and gets stuck because of a trauma or an event that really shook us. And so a piece of us gets stuck and detached or dissociated with our waking consciousness. But yet this other piece is helping to steer the ship. And it's doing so kind of on autopilot. And then, not in realizing that it was this old wounding event that's causing certain behaviors. So that's that, when I mentioned earlier about that, the shaman is also kind of a therapist. So there's one part medicine, one part, kind of like the priest or the minister, the clergy member. And then there's another piece that is very much kind of like therapy. The difference is that to a shaman, to shamanic practice, those things aren't put in boxes. We haven't compartmentalized the well-being physically. You don't feel well, you go see your doc. Emotionally, you don't feel well, you go see the shrink. You're having a crisis of faith, or you want to have you go talk to your minister. But within shamanic work, all those things are overlapping and connected. So there really isn't a one size fits all with people. So usually when I work with clients, or people come to me, it first starts in a conversation. What's going on? What's driving you to want to do this? What are the underlying? And some people want to have the experience of what is this like. And of course, sometimes we just have to have the experience so that someone has an understanding. But once the experience is had, usually the next thing is, wow, I didn't know I had all that within me, or I didn't know that I was capable of having an experience like that. And then it opens the door to other deeper work.
Yeah,
Does that make
that's,
sense?
oh, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
the journeys that I've been on have definitely been very poignant and interesting.
Yeah.
And in my first one, I went in to meet my guides, and actually end up meeting my shadow.
Yeah.
Funny
Yep.
that you brought it up. And that was like one of the, uh, that was a very eerie
I bet.
meeting for sure. Not something, I mean, like, we had journeyed to the underworld first, and then we were coming up and going, I guess, to the upper level. And everything had been so beautiful and magical. And, that was a pretty strong awakening, I guess, in regards to
I
like, whoa,
Yeah, I'm sure it
I didn't
was.
even know kind of how to handle it at the time.
Yeah.
And it was really beautiful, because it totally freaked me out. I'm not even gonna lie. But then I was just like, okay, I'm ready to move forward in this journey. And it was beautiful, because Jesus and Mother Magdalene and Mother Teresa actually ended up coming and soothing me and just talking to me about what had happened and why. And it was really cool. But
Yeah. And I think that's fantastic. And like what you're sharing is just that. Like to because a lot of folks will ask, I want to meet my spirit guide. So that's an intention. But just what you were experiencing and explaining about your experience about like this underworld journey, for those who not sure what that is, the underworld is the place of our deep healing and our ancestors. But there's oftentimes this concept that healing work is gentle and is all white light, and yes, that's a piece of it. There's certain times for a gentle presence and a lighter, but oftentimes, we need to go into the underworld to see what's underneath the surface, that shadow side. That's that wounding that really needs attention. It eventually becomes the soothing, higher vibrational healing that comes through, but it's oftentimes very difficult and challenging in the beginning, and
yeah,
hard. It's hard work. Deep healing work is hard work. But it's all equally important. And without one, you don't have the other. So
I would almost
it's all
argue,
about that.
honestly, that it's more important, quite frankly. I mean,
I would agree.
in my personal experience, and even outside of a shamanic journey, I have learned the most when I've lost the most. I
Hmm.
have grown the most, when I've failed the most. I have, all of the yin and the yang of those situations. I think here, especially in Northern America, we have so much that doing without, or I mean, like we were talking about slow internet before this and how that's like a first world problem,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just how good it is for us to kind of get, to get shooken up so that we do go to those places and we do deal with those things, or we do start uncovering those things, because you're so right. I mean, that's where the healing comes from. And I imagine certainly parts of it, of course, come in very soft, gentle waves, but like, um, how do you, and this is totally side note, but do you think it's like more hardcore? Like, is that in relation to how stubborn a person is, or maybe strong-willed, or anything like that? Or because you've
As
obviously
far
had a lot
as
of experience.
as far as their ability to do this type of thing, or
No, no, no. So I guess, and this is, you know, total curiosity that just popped up in my mind.
yeah.
Um, but just in regards to kind of um, the intensity perhaps of the healing, you
Oh,
know, like, oh,
yeah.
hey, I'm really hardcore, I'm really stubborn, so I'm not going to be paying attention. So the universe has got to get really loud, or got to really, you know what I mean?
I see.
Am
Yeah.
I making
And
more sense?
yes, yes. And I think that I think that um I think possibly is a good answer to that. But one of the things that I'm continuously being reminded of, um, is that as similar as we are as human beings, um, when it comes to our healing and how we process things, there really isn't a way to say like this personality type or whatever. Sometimes they just need the big wake up call. Yeah, that's true, and maybe some of that has to do with a resistance internally, that people have. But I've had folks um, that have surprised me and have surprised themselves. Like I've had folks that really feel like they've gone really deep into things, and yeah, I've kind of found out a lot of stuff for myself and really worked through, and think that they're kind of done, so to speak, with the real hard stuff. And 2 or 3 sessions in, and they've gone even deeper than what they thought, and like, oh my gosh, there was even another door to go through, that even more that I had to deal with.
I would think that
and
there's never ending, right? I
and
mean,
it's not, and that's the thing. And it's like, so I that's why I whenever I work with someone individually, or even with a group for that matter, um it really is, there's not a one size fits all. And so people have their own internal stuff that's going on, and their willingness to really say yes to the process has a lot to do with what the outcome is too.
yeah,
And what I mean by that is that saying yes to really go deep into some of this work isn't just a word.
yeah,
The yes has to come from within. It has to be a real desire. Yes, I am fully engaged in this. I am fully committed to figure out how I can become the next greater version of myself through this type of healing work. Or yes, I'm really committed to allow this to be difficult. Should it be difficult, I embrace that. Some people say they are, but then it takes them and it gets them out of their comfort zone, and then they retract a little bit, and that's okay too, because you can't force anybody to do any work that they don't want to do. And particularly when it comes to personal development and growth and feeling spiritually connected, everyone has to move at their own pace.
for
And some
sure.
people get the big wallop on top of the head, right? And it takes a big thing to happen, a big event to happen, for them to have that moment of, wow, I really need to start working on this, because something just, my relationship just blew up, or I, experienced a health crisis that they didn't realize was simmering underneath the surface. And so it's one of those things, and it just depends. It just
Yeah.
depends on the individual.
No, that makes
Um,
complete sense.
but
I mean,
but I will
it's,
say that anybody who chooses to do this work should automatically give themselves a little pat on the back, because it takes courage
yeah,
to want to be better. It takes courage to want to be a better human being, or more connected human being, particularly in the world that we live in right now, because it's so easy to just scroll through our phones, or to binge watch on Netflix, or is so many, and the world is a busy place, and it's a fast paced world that we live in. And so it takes courage, on no matter how big or small that step is. When someone decides, you know what, I want to commit some time to personal growth, that right there is a courageous statement and a courageous step, no matter how big or small that is, because we're stepping against the current of what's out in the collective right now. Even though this is
yeah,
growing, and we are adding to the collective in a positive way, our society is pushing in the other direction in many ways,
for
right? Or is
sure.
flowing in another direction. So it takes guts to even, no matter how big or small that statement or step is. And it always starts with one step, you know?
So I have one more question for you before we jump into our lightning round. And I'd love to know how you think shamanism is relevant in today's world.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Um, and I'm going to say, I think part of the huge disconnect that we see in the world, and it's far reaching, whether it's our disconnect in the way we treat our environment and the planet, the way we treat each other, the way that we have prioritized money over what's best for our world and each other. Not saying that we can't live in an abundant world where money is included, but we've prioritized it. It's at the top. And so there's this big disconnect, like, well, and the disconnect has caused us, in what I feel, to be sick. I think that our society, in many ways, that the things that make us sick, meaning mental illness, which can turn to physical illness, is because we have this disconnect, that we're not spiritually connected to our home, meaning the earth. We're not spiritually connected to all the life on the planet and all the people on the planet. If we saw other people truly as our brothers and sisters, we wouldn't be creating war on this planet,
Yes,
right? We wouldn't
agreed.
be harming each other. There wouldn't be the social injustice that exists in this world right now. So I think that, to get back to a simpler, and it doesn't have to be any more complicated, other than just embracing the fact that we're all part of the same one thing, whatever that one thing is. You can put whatever label on it you want, but we are all spiritual beings that are connected to this one greater source, and we're all creating it together. We're all creating together. Once we get back to that, which I do believe that is in the written record and in the oral traditions of every great spiritual tradition that ever existed, whether it's a shamanic tradition or a spiritual tradition that exists today, any great spiritual tradition, the underlying message is that we're part of something greater and we're all equal in
Yes, totally agreed.
it.
Preach. Yeah, I think that that's certainly, even when the COVID first started popping up, I mean, for me, it was just like, this is leveling the playing field.
Totally.
And that's a good thing. It's a time thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
we have abused our planet, we have abused ourselves, each
Mm-hmm.
other, and our resources and all of that for too long. Because there is such a perfect balance in this world, it was coming at some point in time. You know,
It had to happen.
people are like surprised, and I'm like, really? How are
Right.
you surprised? I mean, this comes from food is kind of where we're assuming. And I mean, look at the way we treat our animals and the way I mean, you know, that's like a whole different rant and tyrant and things that we could, you know, talk about for a long time that I think is very relevant and real. But it all comes back to, this is, I feel, the very beginning of the reawakening of us as a planet, as a culture, to what you're saying, that we are all one. And you know, it's like, if we could all individually understand that, like literally, if we could all just grasp that and come to know that, like suffering would be over tomorrow. It would end immediately.
Immediately,
As soon as,
instantaneously.
as soon as we, you know, and embody that, embrace that, like boom, done.
Yep.
It's just such a powerful and simple thing, right?
Yes. And we
Okay.
will get
Yeah.
there. I do
Yes.
believe we're going to get there. I do. And I
Agreed.
think that in our lifetimes, we are in the transition. And just like we're talking about healing on a personal level, why things look so scary sometimes out in the world right now, and all the ugly that we're seeing and all the challenges, it's because just what we were saying before, just like what happens on the microcosm happens on the macrocosm, and vice versa. And so, yeah, it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. But when we come out the other side, when we get to the next version of what humankind is going to be, we are going to have a better understanding. You know, we don't have to go back to living so simply like our ancestors did and get rid of all of the technology that we can have both, but
Yeah.
we can do it in a way that it's not destructive. You
Yeah.
know, we start looking at,
That's
well,
loving.
the earth is our home, and it's a sacred place, and the earth herself is alive. We need to stop polluting it. We need to start taking care of the earth just like we would take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And all those things are going to happen. They're happening now, because this conversation that we're having today, right now, these conversations are happening every day all across the globe. People are having conversations just like this. And that wasn't the case just a few years ago. Just
For
10 years
sure.
ago, when I first came into this back in the 90s, I mean, I felt like, you know, granted, it was before the internet and before all that stuff. And so it felt like there weren't a whole lot of people with like-minded. But that's not the case anymore. Technology has actually brought these types of things, brought people together in ways that we couldn't have before. So, well, we're going to get there for sure.
I
We will
agree.
get there.
I agree fully. I have plenty of hope.
I do too.
All right. So are you ready for our closeout questions?
As ready as
No,
I'll
no, no,
ever
no, no,
be.
no,
Let's
no.
do this.
Okay, it's
Yep.
lightning round. So
Okay.
quick answers.
I'll try not to mess this up, get all stuck.
Okay. So number one, what is the one habit you can't live without?
Oh my goodness. That's a tough one. That is a tough one. Um, you know, we have in like maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, something along those lines, we started streaming Gaia TV. Do you know of Gaia TV? I'm a little stuck on Gaia TV right now.
So this is the one habit
I
you
will
live without?
admittedly say that there's been some binge watches of Gaia TV in the past few months. Yeah, that's one that I kind of need to hold on to right now.
All right.
Yeah,
That'll work.
yeah.
Okay. Number two, what does spirituality mean for you?
Um, I think it means just to learn to live, to be a good, learning to be a good human being. What it means to
Mm,
be a good human. If we can learn to be a good human, that's spirit flowing through us.
I like that. Nice and, yeah, simple, but so powerful. What is your advice to anyone who's looking to find purpose?
Um, Welcome that, embrace it, for all of it. That's going to be the ups and downs, right? Because it is embrace the process. and embrace the idea of it not being a straight line, and have fun with it. Just have fun with it. And don't allow anybody else to tell you who you should or shouldn't be. Listen to that little voice inside, in the heart, not up in the head, but in the heart. That'll be your guide. Listen to your heart.
Yes, always. All right. Final question.
All right.
It's huge. Are you ready?
I'm sitting down.
It's no. How can people connect with you? And I know that you offer like online meetings and in person, so make sure you share both of those with us. And
okay, great.
I will be sure to put everything in the show notes, folks, so don't worry.
Yeah, now I just breathed a big sigh of relief because this is easy. So yeah, so I in person, so I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. So in person, I see clients at Native Salt Cave and Wellness, which is a beautiful space for anyone who hasn't been there. It's just an amazing salt cave here in Wilmington. And also at Madame Meerkat's Cabinet of Curiosities. I'm there 2.5 days a week. You can find me, for those who are not local, I do healing sessions and readings and things via Skype and FaceTime, online platform, Zoom. You can email me, Roger, R-O-G-E-R, at shamanfire.net, or Facebook folks, Shamanfire on Facebook. And on Instagram, it's just at Roger Lockshier, Lockshier. And I have folks from all over the country and in other countries as well that contact me and connect with me online, and I'd be happy to share those experiences with anyone out there listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on Soul Driven, Roger. You've been awesome. I feel like we could probably talk for many moons.
We totally could. But I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much for asking me to be on your podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I enjoyed every minute of this.
Same. All right, folks. Well, that wraps up today's episode. Now I want to hear from you. Did today's interview with Roger inspire you to learn more about shamanism? Come discuss it with me on Instagram or Facebook at Soul Driven Podcast, or send me an email, souldrivenpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's message, please leave us an iTunes review, share this episode on social media and with those you love. Sign up for the email list. We've got big news coming your way. And don't forget, when we invest in ourselves, the world benefits. Until next week.